What's going YouTube? In today's video we will be talking about what if Sasuke gave Naruto his Sharingan. If you like today's video, make sure to comment, subscribe, and like. With that being said, let's get into the video. Chapter 1. Fall of a Brother. The world inside Haku's demonic ice mirrors had contracted into a microcosm of crystalline terror. The air was so cold it burned the lungs with each frantic breath, frosting the edges of Naruto's jumpsuit and glazing the cement of the unfinished bridge beneath their feet. The only sounds were the haunting echo of Haku's voice, the sharp hiss of Senbon cutting through frozen air, and the thunderous, distant percussion of Kakashi and Zabuza's duel, a world away. He is fast, Naruto. Sasuke gritted out his Nuloi awakened to Tomo's Sharingan spinning wildly, a crimson pinwheel trying to track dozens of moving targets at once. Sweat beaded on his temple, freezing instantly. His movements, they're not just speed. He's phasing between the mirrors. Then we break the mirrors, Naruto shouted, a kunai held in a white-knuckled grip. His own instincts, a primal, orange-hued chakra simmering just beneath his skin, screamed at him to move, to attack. No time, Sasuke snapped, his eyes flickering. Incoming. Another hail of Senbon erupted from multiple mirrors at once. This was no random volley, it was a calculated pincer maneuver. Sasuke's Sharingan, pushed to its nascent limit, saw the pattern a fragment of a second before it was complete. A cluster of needles, glinting with deadly intent, was aimed not at him, but at a blind spot in Naruto's frantic defense, the space between his shoulder and neck, a strike meant to sever vital nerves. There was no thought, only action. A guttural cry tore from Sasuke's throat, not of pain, but of effort, as he threw his entire body into Naruto's side. The shove was brutal, sending the blonde stumbling away just as the Senbon whipped into the space he'd occupied. And into Sasuke. The impact was sickeningly soft. Two of the slender needles found their mark, burying themselves deep in the side of Sasuke's neck, perilously close to his carotid artery and spine. He didn't scream. A choked gasp escaped him, his eyes widening in shock before the Sharingan flickered and died, leaving only the dark, depthless onyx of the Uchiha. His legs buckled, and he collapsed to the cold cement with a heavy, final sound. Sasuke Naruto's roar was raw, tearing from a place of pure, unadulterated terror. He scrambled to his friend's side, his hands hovering, unsure where to touch. The Senbon looked like vile, metallic feathers sprouting from his neck. Sasuke's face was pale, his breathing shallow and wet. Haku's form solidified in a mirror before them, the Anbu mask betraying no emotion. He moved on instinct to protect you. The mellifluous voice held a note of genuine, sorrowful surprise. A beautiful, yet tragic, loyalty. He will not feel the next one, I promise. Inside Naruto, something shattered. The careful, fragile dam holding back the bilious, red-hued chakra of the Nine Tails cracked. A surge of corrosive, alien energy flooded his system, hotter than any fireball jutsu. His vision tinged red at the edges. But before the fox could fully take the wheel, Sasuke's hand shot up, trembling violently, and clamped around Naruto's wrist. The grip was shockingly strong. And Naruto, Sasuke's voice was a wet whisper, bubbles of blood forming at the corner of his lips. His dark eyes, glazed with pain, found Naruto's panicked blue ones. In them, Naruto saw no fear of death. Only a terrifying, focused resolve. With his other hand, Sasuke moved. It wasn't a gesture of pain or weakness. It was deliberate, precise, a final jutsu. His fingers wrapped around the two Senbon protruding from his neck. Naruto watched, horrified and mesmerized, as Sasuke, without a flinch, pulled them free with a sickening, wet slide. Blood, dark and arterial, welled up and began to stream down his neck, soaking into the high collar of his shirt. Sasuke, no, stop moving, we need to. Shut up, Toad. Sasuke wheezed, a ghost of his old smirk twisting his bloodied lips. His eyes locked onto Naruto's with an intensity that pinned him in place. Listen, my life is over. I can feel it. The spine, the artery, it's done. Don't say that. We'll get Kakashi-sensei. We'll. There's no time. The force of the whisper was a command. Sasuke's hand, slick with his own blood, came up. In it, the two blood-tipped Senbon gleamed. My dream dies with me, but yours doesn't have to. Naruto's mind, fogged with panic and the fox's rage, couldn't parse the words. What are you? Sasuke's last reserve of strength was Uchiha's strength. born of a will forged in the fires of genocide. In one fluid, brutal motion, he brought his hands up. Not to attack an enemy, but to bestow a legacy. He plunged the two senbon into Naruto's eyes. There was a moment of blinding, white-hot agony, a sensation of liquid heat and popping pressure, and then, nothing. The world, Sasuke's bloody, determined face, the glittering ice mirrors, the gray sky, vanished into an absolute, impenetrable blackness. Naruto screamed, a sound of pure, physical and psychological torment, clawing at his face. His hands came away wet, but not just with his tears. I'm sorry for this. Sasuke's voice was closer now, a dying breath against his ear. He was slumped against Naruto, his weight growing heavier. Take them, after this mission. Have the medic nin. Transplant my eyes. The Sharingan is yours now. Sasuke, you bastard. What did you do? Naruto wailed, blind and helpless, clutching his friend's collapsing form. My goal, Itachi Uchiha. The name was a curse and a prayer on Sasuke's lips. Kill him. Avenge our clan. Then, I'll rest easy in the Pure Land, knowing you completed my goal. A violent, racking cough seized him, bringing up more blood. He was fading, the words becoming fainter, forced out with his last vestiges of life. And become Hokage, brother. The final word hung in the frozen air, a benediction and a burden. Brother, it was an acknowledgement of their rivalry, their fights, their unshakable bond forged in the crucible of Team 7. It was a title Sasuke had never spoken aloud. Then, the grip on Naruto's wrist went slack. The weight against him became a dead weight. The shallow, ragged breathing stopped. Silence. In that void of sight and sound, something within Naruto Uzumaki broke open. Not just grief, though that was a tsunami threatening to drown him, but the last barrier to the entity sealed within his navel. The red chakra didn't just leak, it erupted. A column of furious, crimson energy exploded from his small form, shattering the ice mirrors around them into a million glittering shards. The force of it blasted Haku, who had been watching in stunned, horrified silence, clean out of their formation. Naruto rose, a bestial, guttural growl reverberated from his chest, no longer entirely human. A single, fox-like tail of dense chakra materialized behind him, lashing the air. His features sharpened, his whisker marks darkening. But his eyes, the ruined sockets, streamed with a mixture of blood and corrosive red chakra. He was blind, but the Kyuubi did not need eyes to hunt. It used sand, the metallic tang of blood, the unique chakra signature of the ice user. It used sound, the frantic heartbeat of its prey, the crunch of ice underfoot. It used pure, homicidal instinct. You hurt my brother. The voice was a layered nightmare, Naruto's own twisted and deepened by the fox's malice. Haku, a master of silent assassination, was completely unprepared for this. This wasn't a shinobi fight, it was a predator slaughter. Naruto moved in a blur of red, a feral scream tearing from his throat. He didn't throw kune, he didn't form hand signs. He clawed, he battered, he ripped with chakra-enhanced strength that pulverized ice and flesh alike. Haku's speed was meaningless against this omnidirectional, sensory rage. Mirrors were smashed before Haku could enter them. Senbon shattered against the red chakra cloak. It was a brutal, one-sided dismantling that ended with Naruto's chakra-clawed hand thrust through Haku's chest, the hunter nin's mask cracking to reveal eyes wide with pain, regret, and a strange, sorrowful acceptance. As Haku's life faded, whispering apologies to Zabuza, the red chakra around Naruto receded like a tide, leaving him kneeling on the bloody, ice-strewn cement, blind, empty, and hollow. The weight of Sasuke's body against him was the only anchor in a world of nothingness. Across the bridge, the battle had reached its climax. Kakashi Hatake, his own Sharingan whirling, had seen the crimson explosion of chakra, had felt its vile, overwhelming hatred. A cold dread, colder than any of Haku's eyes, had seized his heart. Naruto, Sasuke, but he could not afford to look. Not with Zabuza Mamachi, the demon of the hidden mist, bearing down on him with the full fury of a man who had just watched his own weapon, his sole companion, fall. It was the grief in Zabuza's roar, a mirror to the one he knew was tearing at Naruto, that gave Kakashi the final, grim opening. As Zabuza charged, no longer a calculating mercenary but a grieving beast, Kakashi performed the Chidori. The sound of 1,000 birds screeching filled the air, a dissonant elegy. He met Zabuza's final, desperate charge head-on. the lightning cutter piercing the mist nin's heart. Zabuza fell, his last breaths used not to curse his killer, but to ask Kakashi to take him to Haku's side. As the mist began to thin, stained pink with the setting sun and the blood of the fallen, Kakashi turned and ran, his heart hammering against his ribs. The scene he came upon would be seared into his memory forever. In a circle of destroyed ice and scarred cement, Naruto Uzumaki knelt. He was cradling Sasuke Uchiha's limp form in his arms, rocking slightly. Blood, so much blood, covered them both, a macabre paint on orange and blue. Naruto's face was tilted upward, sideless eyes wide open, twin trails of dried blood and tears carving paths through the grime on his cheeks. He made no sound, but the sheer, silent devastation radiating from his small frame was louder than any scream. Naruto Kakashi's voice was hoarse. He approached slowly, his own body aching with exhaustion and a grief he hadn't allowed himself to feel since the death of his own team. "He's gone, Kakashi-sensei," Naruto whispered, his voice flat, dead. "Sasuke's gone. He gave me his eyes. He told me to kill Itachi. He called me brother." Each word was a hammer blow. Kakashi's single eye widened, taking in the senbon on the ground, the specific wounds. The horrific, profound truth of it crashed over him. A bloodline limit, willingly bestowed in a final act of twisted love and desperate legacy. The Uchiha clan's last loyal son was dead. And he had passed their cursed power to the village's pariah, its Jinchuriki. The sun dipped below the horizon of the land of waves, casting long, deep shadows. The battle was won. The bridge, a symbol of hope, stood. But on its cold surface, Team 7 lay shattered. Kakashi stood over the broken form of his student, the boy who held a demon and now carried the eyes of a ghost, and knew nothing would ever be the same again. The legacy of the Uchiha, and the destiny of Naruto Uzumaki, had just been fused in the most tragic, bloody, and irrevocable way imaginable. A new life, born from the fall of a brother, began in that moment of utter darkness. The world came back to Kakashi in a horrifying, overlapping echo. The metallic scent of blood, so thick in the air of the bridge, transposed itself over the phantom smell of rain-slicked stone from a night 17 years past. The weight of Sasuke's still form in his mind's eye bled into the memory of another Uchiha, Obito, crushed and broken beneath a boulder, offering a final gift with his last breath. "I'm giving you my Sharingan." For a vertiginous second, Kakashi wasn't on the Great Naruto Bridge. He was in the hell of Kanabi Bridge, the cries of his teammates, Rin's horrified shrieks, Obito's fading voice, superimposed over the present. The cycle of loss, of gifted eyes and shattered teams, was a nightmare repeating itself with cruel precision. His own Sharingan, the one Obito had given him, throbbed dully in its socket, a permanent, aching reminder. Not again, please, not again. His paralysis was shattered by a sound that cut sharper than any senbon. Sasuke-kan. Sakura Haruno, who had been fighting her own battle against terror and irrelevance on the sidelines, finally broke from her cover. Her green eyes, wide with denial, took in the scene, the shattered ice, the blood, the two boys at the center of it all. She saw Naruto, frozen and bloodied, holding Sasuke. She saw the unnatural angle of Sasuke's neck, the pallor of his skin, the absolute stillness of the proud Uchiha posture. A raw, wounded animal sound ripped from her throat. She stumbled forward, her legs barely holding her, and collapsed beside them. Her hands, trembling violently, hovered over Sasuke's chest, his face, afraid to touch, yet desperate for a sign of life. "No, no, 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 no," she chanted, the word a desperate prayer against reality. Her tears fell freely, splashing onto Sasuke's blood-stained shirt. She reached out, her fingers brushing a lock of his inky hair from his forehead, a gesture of tender familiarity that felt obscene in the face of death. "Sasuke-kan, wake up, please, you have to wake up, you can't do this." Her grief was vocal, physical, a storm of anguish. She shook his shoulder gently, then more frantically. "We're a team, we just started, you can't leave, you promised you'd get stronger, you promised you'd." Her words dissolved into incoherent sobs, her body curling in on itself as she clutched at his arm, as if she could physically tether his spirit to the world. Her shrieks and cries painted the air with a color of loss that was entirely different from Naruto's silent cataclysm. They were the audible heartbreak of a world that had just lost its son, its focal point. And Naruto, just inches away, heard it all from within his absolute darkness. Each of Sakura's sobs was a needle driving deeper into the hollow space Sasuke had left behind. He could feel the vibration of her grief through the cold cement. But he was frozen, encased in a shell of shock and a new, terrifying sensory deprivation. The only person whose voice had ever carried a thread of acknowledgement, not of the demon, but of Naruto, was gone. Their rivalry, their grudging respect, their unspoken bond forged in 1,000 shared glances and synchronized moves during training, it had been the closest thing to brotherhood he'd ever known. A bond fought for, not given. And he hadn't even seen it end. That was the cruelest cut. Sasuke's final act, the painful, bloody gift, the weight of his dying words, the ghost of a smirk, had been given in total darkness. Naruto had felt it, heard it, but he had not seen it. He would never have the visual memory of his friend's last expression, the look in his eyes as he called him brother. That moment, the most profound of his young life, existed only as sound, touch, and smell, blood, cold metal, and the fading warmth of Sasuke's breath. It was a memory half-formed, forever incomplete, a painting with the central figure torn out. He was blind in more ways than one. The world was black, and the one person who had truly seen him, not the container, not the clown, but the determined, loyal boy underneath, was gone. The warmth against his side was cooling rapidly, a terrible metric of time passing, of life departing. Kakashi, shaking off the ghosts of the past, forced himself to move. He was a jonin, a leader. His own grief was a luxury he could not afford. He knelt first beside Sakura, his hand coming to rest gently on her shaking shoulder. Sakura, he said, his voice low and strained but deliberately calm. Sakura, look at me. She turned her tear-streaked, shattered face to him. Sensei, he's. I know, Kakashi said, the words heavy. I need you to be strong now, for the team. I need to check on Naruto. The mention of Naruto seemed to barely register through her wall of grief for Sasuke. She nodded numbly, her sobs subsiding into silent, heaving tremors, her gaze fixing back on Sasuke's face as if by staring hard enough she could reverse what had happened. Kakashi shifted his position, coming to kneel in front of Naruto. The boy hadn't moved a muscle. His face, turned toward Kakashi's voice, was a mask of dried blood and blank shock. The eyelids were closed now, but the damage was evident. Naruto, Kakashi said softly, his professional eye already assessing the horrific injury. The Senbon strikes were precise, deliberate. Not an attack, but a procedure. Sasuke's last, brutal act of will. Naruto, can you hear me? A slow, almost imperceptible nod. The mission is over. Zabuza and Haku are dead. The bridge is secure. He delivered the facts. An anchor in the storm. I need you to let go of Sasuke now. I need to prepare him for the journey home. The word home seemed to trigger something. A fresh tear, clear this time, traced a path through the grime on Naruto's cheek. He gave me his eyes, Naruto repeated, his voice a hollow monotone. He said, take them, kill Itachi, become Hokage, a shuddering breath. He called me brother. I know, Kakashi said, his own heart constricting. The legacy, the burden, was immense. And it was now irrevocably Naruto's to carry. We will honor his will, Naruto, but right now, I need you to trust me. I need to take care of both of you. With infinite gentleness, Kakashi pried Naruto's stiff, blood-caked fingers from Sasuke's jacket. He then carefully gathered Sasuke's body into his arms, arranging the limbs with a somber respect. The Uchiha boy felt tragically small, the weight of his ambition and hatred gone, leaving only the fragile shell of a 13-year-old. Sakura let out a fresh whimper as Kakashi lifted him. Naruto, now empty-armed, listlessly brought his hands up to his face again, his fingers probing the sealed, ruined lids. The physical pain was a distant echo compared to the cavernous void inside him. He was alone in the dark, with only the dying echo of a brother's last request and the sound of a teammate weeping for the boy he could no longer see. The sunset had faded fully, plunging the land of waves into a deep, misty twilight. Kakashi Hatake stood on the silent bridge, a dead student in his arms and a broken, blinded one at his feet. The victory was ashes. The cost was written in blood and gifted eyes, a price that would forever alter the destiny of the boy who dreamed of Hokage, and the future of the village he hoped to lead. Disclaimer: this is a fan work based on Naruto by Masashi Kishimoto. All original characters and settings belong to their respective copyright holders. This transformative work is for entertainment purposes only. Author's notes. Hello, wonderful readers. First and foremost, thank you for taking the time to read Naruto, Combined Legacies. This story has been a labor of passion, and knowing that there are people out there enjoying the journey of Naruto, Sakura, Sai, and the rest of this reimagined world means more than I can properly express. Support the story. If you are enjoying Naruto, Combined Legacies so far, you can always check out the latest updates and chapters over on my P4 or if you want to catch up, the story is 8 plus chapters ahead. Your support, whether financial or simply by being a presence in the community, gives me the strength and motivation to keep producing this story. Writing is a solitary craft, but knowing that others are sharing in the adventure makes every word worth it. Chapter 2, Grief. The return to Konoha was a journey made in a shroud of grim silence. Kakashi had handled the aftermath on the bridge with a chilling, efficient calm that spoke of a man too acquainted with death. He had spoken to Chizuna and the villagers, his single visible eye flat and unreadable, arranging for the bridge's completion, a bittersweet monument to the blood spilled for its foundation. He had sent a message ahead via a Konoha messenger hawk, its contents brief, coded, and bearing the weight of catastrophe. The bodies of Sabusa and Haku were given a mercenary's pyre on the edge of the mist. Their story was over. For Naruto and Sakura, the voyage was a blur of sensory fragments and emotional numbness. Naruto sat rigidly in the boat, then the wagon, a thick bandage covering the upper half of his face, courtesy of Kakashi's field medic kit. The world was reduced to sounds, the lap of water, the creak of wagon wheels, the low murmur of Kakashi's voice giving terse instructions. And beneath it all, a constant, deafening echo, brother. Kill Itachi. Become Hokage. The words were a mantra of obligation and loss, playing on a loop in the dark theater of his mind. Sakura, meanwhile, was trapped in a prison of her own thoughts. She watched Naruto's unnaturally still form, the usual vibrant energy utterly extinguished. She glanced at the long, wrapped bundle Kakashi carried with solemn care, Sasuke's body, prepared for the journey home. Each glance was a physical blow. Her mind replayed the fight on the bridge in excruciating, guilty detail. Her paralysis, her uselessness. While Sasuke and Naruto fought back to back, she had hidden. While Sasuke gave his life, she had watched. The memory was a corrosive acid, eating away at her heart. I was weak. My weakness let him die. If I had been stronger, faster, braver. They passed through the towering gates of Konoha as the sun was setting, casting long, accusing shadows. The village bustled with its usual late afternoon rhythm, a normalcy that felt like a grotesque parody. Kakashi stopped just inside the gate, his posture weary to its bones. Sakura, he said, his voice low. Take Naruto directly to the hospital. Tell the reception it's for me. Do not leave his side. I will deal with everything else. His eye flicked toward the rat bundle, then to the Hokage's tower looming in the distance. The third Hokage would need to be informed. The Uchiha compound, already a ghost town, would need to be officially notified of the demise of its last scion. The paperwork of death awaited him. Sakura nodded mutely, a fresh lump in her throat. She moved to Naruto's side, her hand finding his arm. His muscles were tense as coiled wire. Come on, Naruto, she said, her voice thick. The hospital is this way. Naruto offered no resistance. He simply turned his head slightly toward the sound of her voice and allowed himself to be guided. His other hand came up, fingers brushing the rough fabric of the bandage over his eyes, a subconscious, futile gesture. Their walk through the village streets was a slow, torturous procession. Sakura, her heart a leaden weight in her chest, navigated the familiar paths by road, her attention split between guiding Naruto and the reactions around them. People stared. Two genin, one clearly injured and blindfolded, the other with eyes red raw from crying and clothes still stained with dirt and dried blood, were an unusual sight. Whispers trailed in their wake like poisonous vines. Isn't that Team 7's girl? And that boy. Looks like they got into real trouble. A C rank gone wrong, I heard. The Uchiha brat isn't with them. Odd. That blindfold, what happened to his eyes? Naruto, in his darkness, was spared the visual judgment, but he was hyper-aware of the whispers, the sudden silences as they passed, the faint clicks of shutters closing. The village's ambient hostility, usually a background noise he shouted over, was now a palpable, smothering blanket. He tightened his grip on Sakura's arm. Sakura felt each glance like a physical prick. Her grief was private, a sacred, terrible thing, and it felt profaned by these curious, pitying, or indifferent stares. The guilt and sorrow within her began to curdle into something sharper, more volatile. They turned a corner into a market street, the smell of produce and fish thick in the air. A woman in an apron, arranging cabbages at a stall, looked up as they passed. Her eyes, hard and familiar with the village's unspoken prejudices, landed on Naruto's headband and his distinctive spiky blonde hair beneath the bandage. Her lips twisted into a familiar scowl of disapproval. She didn't speak loudly, but in the relative quiet of the street, her muttered words carried like a dart. Serves that demon brat right, bringing his curse on others. Poor Uchiha boy, probably dead because of him. Naruto, his world defined by echoes, didn't catch the specific words, only the venomous tone. He flinched minutely. Sakura, however, heard them with crystalline, devastating clarity. Every ounce of her guilt, her grief, her fury at her own weakness, and her shattered adoration for Sasuke coalesced into a white-hot point of rage. The woman's words weren't just an insult to Naruto, they were a blasphemy against Sasuke's sacrifice, a reduction of his final, profound act to the village's stupid, hateful narrative. Time seemed to slow. Her analytical mind, usually calculating chakra points or tactical advantages, shut down. Her body moved on pure, unadulterated instinct. Before she even knew what she was doing, Sakura had released Naruto's arm, spun on her heel, and crossed the short distance to the stall. Her open palm connected with the woman's cheek with a crack that echoed off the cobblestones. It wasn't a girl's slap, it was a shinobi's strike, driven by grief and enhanced by a surge of chakra she didn't know she could summon. The woman didn't just stumble. She was lifted off her feet and thrown backwards into her own stall. The wooden frame splintered. Baskets of vegetables, tomatoes, eggplants, carrots, exploded under the impact, pulp and juice and shredded wood flying everywhere. The woman lay sprawled in the wreckage, stunned, one side of her face already blooming an angry red. The market fell dead silent. All eyes were on the pink-haired genin, who stood trembling, not with fear, but with unleashed, terrifying fury. Her fists were clenched, her breathing ragged. She didn't say a word. She didn't justify, didn't explain. She simply turned her back on the wreckage and the stunned onlookers, walked back to where Naruto stood, confused and off balance, and took his arm again, her grip firm. What was that, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked, his head tilted. Nothing, she said, her voice chillingly calm, a stark contrast to the tempest in her eyes. A rotten vegetable fell. Let's keep going. She guided him forward, stepping over a rolling, bruised tomato. The crowd parted for them now, but this time the stares were different, wider, tinged with shock and a new, wary fear. The incident was a footnote, a burst of violence quickly buried under the market's murmurs, but it etched itself into Sakura's soul. It wasn't just about defending Naruto. It was the first, visceral manifestation of a new, brutal truth. The world that had taken Sasuke was a cruel, unforgiving place. Politeness and book smarts were worthless. Only strength mattered, strength to protect what remained, strength to avenge what was lost. Her weakness had allowed Sasuke to die. She would never, ever be weak again. She continued their journey, the phantom sensation of the slap still buzzing in her palm, the image of the crushed vegetables mirroring the crushed future of their team. The hospital's sterile, white facade loomed ahead, a gateway to another kind of ordeal. Behind them, in the vibrant, uncaring life of the village, the echoes of a brother's last wish and the first crack in a kunoichi's old self faded into the gathering dusk. The climb to the Hokage's office was a longer, steeper ascent than Kakashi remembered. Each step up the tower's central staircase echoed in the hollow space where his team used to be. The two Chunin guards at the heavy oak door gave him a solemn nod, their usual casual deference replaced by a grim understanding. Bad news traveled fast in the shinobi rumor mill, especially news carried by a Jonin with death in his posture. He entered without knocking. The office was as it always was, shelves groaning with scrolls, the wide desk littered with paperwork, the large window framing the village lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and a profound, weary authority. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, stood by the window, his back to the door, looking out over his village. He didn't turn as Kakashi approached the desk and placed a sealed mission scroll upon it. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the village and the slow, deliberate tapping of Hiruzen's pipe against the windowsill. Kakashi began his debrief. His voice was a monotone, a clinical recitation of facts stripped of all emotion. The false sea rank, the demon brothers, the mist, Sabusa Mamachi, the hunter nin, Haku, the trap on the bridge. He detailed the strategies, the near misses, the application of tree-walking training. He spoke of Naruto and Sasuke's developing teamwork, their instinctual coordination to free him from the water prison. He was methodical, precise, a perfect reporting shinobi. Then he reached the climax on the bridge. His voice, for the first time, faltered ever so slightly. He described the demonic ice mirrors, Haku's senbon, Sasuke's push, the fatal wounds, and then, the part that made his own gifted eye ache with phantom pain. Sasuke's final, conscious act. The removal of the senbon, the brutal, willing transfer. The last words kill Itachi. Become Hokage, brother. He finished with the Kyuubi's eruption, Haku's death, Sabusa's end, and the silent, shattered tableau he had found. He fell silent. The only sound was the faint scratch of Hiruzen's pen as he took a few notes on a corner of a report, his face unreadable. Finally, the Hokage sighed. It was a deep, weary exhalation that seemed to come from the very foundations of the village. He set his pipe down and closed his eyes, the lines on his face deepening into canyons of regret and burden. He wasn't going to rant at Kakashi. There was no point. Genin died on missions. It was the tragic arithmetic of the shinobi world, a cost factored into every deployment order he signed. Kakashi was a jonin of the highest caliber. He knew the risks, and he had done everything a commander could. A lecture on failure would be a hypocrisy of the highest order, a disrespect to the dead and the grieving. The failure, Hiruzen knew in his old bones, was systemic, historical. It lay in the choices that led to the Uchiha massacre, in the creation of a Jinchuriki who was hated, in a village that bred orphans and then sent them out to die for its walls. So, Hiruzen said, his voice gravelly with suppressed emotion. He opened his eyes, staring at the mission scroll as if it were a funeral notice. The last loyal son of the Uchiha is gone. He paused, the next name a ghost in the room, a specter that haunted both their pasts. Now, only Itachi remains. The mention of that name was a taboo, a key to a locked room filled with national shame and unspeakable horror. It hung between them, charged and terrible. Itachi Uchiha, prodigy, murderer, missing nin, and now, the sole surviving bearer of a massacred clan's name, and the target of a dead boy's vengeance, passed to a blind vessel of demonic power. The Hokage turned from the window, his aged eyes settling on Kakashi. He saw not just the elite jonin, but the boy who had lost his father, his teammate, his sensei, and now his student. The cycle was cruel. Kakashi, Hiruzen asked, his tone shifting from leader to something akin to a weary grandfather. How are you feeling? Kakashi's visible eye remained fixed on a point just above the Hokage's shoulder. A myriad of answers flickered behind his mask, numb, hollow, like history is a record stuck on the same tragic groove. Like I failed another Uchiha who looked to me. What he said was, honestly, Hokage-sama, I just want to finish this debriefing now. It was not disrespect. It was survival. To stop, to dwell, was to invite the ghosts of Rin, of Obito, of Minato-sensei, and now of Sasuke, to congregate in his mind. He needed motion, a duty. Hiruzen nodded slowly, a profound understanding in his gaze. He did not press. He reached into a drawer of his desk and withdrew not a pen, but a small, intricate stamp set in a square of dark cherry wood. It was the official seal of the Hokage, its design granting absolute authority for procedures within the village. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, the weight of decision, of altering a destiny. Go to the hospital, Hiruzen said, his voice firm now, the leader once more. Oversee the procedure, ensure the boy's will is respected. He extended the stamp. This grants full authorization to the head medic, for the transplant, and for any subsequent unique care Naruto-kun may require. The boys will not a medical necessity, but a last request. A bloodline succession enacted not by birth, but by death and choice. Hiruzen was sanctioning it. He was making it official Konoha business. Kakashi took the stamp. The wood was cool, the carved edges sharp against his palm. It was heavier than any weapon. He didn't bow, didn't offer platitudes. He simply closed his fingers around it, turned, and left the office as silently as he had entered, a solitary figure carrying the permission to sow the legacy of one lost boy into the flesh of another. Behind him, Hiruzen sank into his chair, the weight of the village, of its sins and its losses, settling upon his shoulders once more. Outside, the night deepened, unaware of the seismic shift that had just been authorized within the sterile walls of the hospital, where a piece of the Uchiha clan's tragedy was about to find a new, unimaginable home. The Konoha hospital stood as a bastion of sterile, whitewashed order, its clean lines and antiseptic smell a stark contrast to the mud, blood, and visceral chaos of the land of waves. To Sakura, it felt less like a place of healing and more like a cold, judgmental tribunal. She guided Naruto through the sliding glass doors, the automatic hiss sounding like a sharp intake of breath. The lobby was quiet, the evening shift settling in. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale, unforgiving glow on the polished linoleum. Behind the high, laminate reception desk sat a woman in a crisp nurse's uniform, her hair in a severe bun, her attention fixed on a clipboard. She looked up as they approached, her eyes performing a swift, professional assessment. They flicked over Sakura's disheveled appearance, the dark stains on her clothes, the lingering redness around her eyes. Then they moved to Naruto. They noted the standard issue forehead protector, the shock of blonde hair, and most prominently, the thick, field dress bandage covering his eyes. A flicker of recognition, followed by a subtle but unmistakable hardening, passed over her features. It was a look Sakura was coming to know intimately, the village's ingrained prejudice manifesting in a single, dismissive glance. "We need to see a medic nin immediately," Sakura stated, her voice attempting authority but frayed at the edges. "Hatake Kakashi sent us. It's urgent." The receptionist's lips thinned. She didn't open the ledger. Instead, she adopted a tone of bureaucratic boredom laced with veiled contempt. "Urgent cases are seen based on triage priority. There are procedures, and given the nature of this patient's condition," she said, her eyes lingering on Naruto's bandage as if it were a contaminated object, "certain specialized containment protocols might need to be reviewed before he can be admitted to a general ward. You can wait over there. A doctor will be with you when one is available." She gestured dismissively toward a row of hard plastic chairs in the corner. It was the dismissal, the cold, procedural wall erected not out of genuine protocol, but out of fear and loathing for the boy standing helplessly beside her. It was the final straw on a day that had seen her world end. Sakura's vision tunneled. The sterile white wall seemed to pulse. The hum of the lights became the buzz of the ice mirrors. The receptionist's pinched face blurred with the memory of the market woman's scowling visage. "Weakness. Your weakness let him die. And this is the world that created the weakness." Naruto, attuned to the sudden, tense silence, shifted his weight. "Sakura-chan, what's wrong?" The receptionist opened her mouth to utter another placating, venomous dismissal. Sakura did not let her speak. Her body was a coiled spring released. There was no dramatic wind-up, no shouted warning. One moment she was holding Naruto's arm, the next she had leaned across the high desk. Her hand, the same one that had struck the vegetable seller, shot out with even more precise, controlled fury. The slap connected with the woman's cheek with a sound like a gunshot in the quiet lobby, a sharp, wet crack that echoed off the walls. The force was not enough to send her flying, but it was brutal. The woman's head snapped to the side, her bun coming undone, strands of hair whipping across her stunned face. Her clipboard clattered to the floor, papers scattering. She staggered back against the filing cabinets, a hand flying to her already reddening cheek, her eyes wide with shock and pain, all bureaucratic pretense shattered. Absolute silence descended, broken only by the persistent hum of the lights. Naruto jumped at the sound. "Sakura-chan, what was that?" Sakura slowly withdrew her hand, her knuckles white. She didn't look at the stunned, weeping receptionist. She looked directly ahead, her emerald eyes glazed with a terrifying, icy calm. "HN, it was a misplaced clipboard falling," she said, her voice flat and utterly devoid of its usual expressive range. "It must have startled you." She then turned her chilling gaze back to the receptionist, who was now cowering, one hand on her face. "Now," Sakura said, each word dropping like a stone. "A private room, for Uzumaki Naruto, Genin of Team 7, under the direct order of Jonin Commander Hatake Kakashi, and you will fetch a senior medic nin, not when one is available, now." There was no argument. The woman, sniffling and terrified, fumbled with her keys and led them out from behind the desk with unsteady steps, abandoning her post. She didn't guide them so much as she fled ahead of them, the imprint of Sakura's hand livid on her face. The walk down the long, disinfectant-scented corridor was surreal. The nurse's squeaking shoes led the way. Sakura guided Naruto, whose face was a mask of confusion and dawning comprehension. He said nothing. The echo of that slap, so much sharper and more final than the one in the market, told him everything he needed to know about the reception they had received. They were shown into a small, private examination room, a concession undoubtedly born of fear, not protocol. The nurse fled without another word, the door swinging shut behind her. In the sudden quiet, the reality of where they were settled in. The room was cold, all gleaming metal surfaces and the faint, astringent smell of iodine. A padded examination table dominated the center. She wasn't going to hell, was she? Naruto asked quietly, his face turned toward where he guessed Sakura was standing. Sakura didn't answer directly. She helped him sit on the edge of the cold table. It doesn't matter, she finally said, the ice in her voice thawing slightly into sheer exhaustion. They'll help now. She stood beside him, alone, stubborn sentinel in the sterile room, waiting for the medic nin who would determine the physical fate of Naruto's eyes, while the ghost of Sasuke Uchiha and the echo of two slaps hung heavily in the air between them. The hospital, a place of healing, had become the next battlefield, and Sakura had just drawn a very clear, very violent line in the sand. The climb to the Hokage's office was a longer, steeper ascent than Kakashi remembered. Each step up the tower's central staircase echoed in the hollow space where his team used to be. The two Chunin guards at the heavy oak door gave him a solemn nod, their usual casual deference replaced by a grim understanding. Bad news traveled fast in the shinobi rumor mill, especially news carried by a jonin with death in his posture. He entered without knocking. The office was as it always was, shelves groaning with scrolls, the wide desk littered with paperwork, the large window framing the village lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. The air smelled of old paper, pipe tobacco, and a profound, weary authority. Sarutobi Hiruzen, the third Hokage, stood by the window, his back to the door, looking out over his village. He didn't turn as Kakashi approached the desk and placed a sealed mission scroll upon it. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the village and the slow, deliberate tapping of Hiruzen's pipe against the windowsill. Kakashi began his debrief. His voice was a monotone, a clinical recitation of facts stripped of all emotion. The false sea rank, the demon brothers, the mist, Sabusa Mamachi, the hunter nin, Haku, the trap on the bridge. He detailed the strategies, the near misses, the application of tree-walking training. He spoke of Naruto and Sasuke's developing teamwork, their instinctual coordination to free him from the water prison. He was methodical, precise, a perfect reporting shinobi. Then he reached the climax on the bridge. His voice, for the first time, faltered ever so slightly. He described the demonic ice mirrors, Haku's senbon, Sasuke's push, the fatal wounds, and then, the part that made his own gifted eye ache with phantom pain. Sasuke's final, conscious act. The removal of the senbon, the brutal, willing transfer. The last words, kill Itachi, become Hokage, brother. He finished with the Kyuubi's eruption, Haku's death, Sabusa's end, and the silent, shattered tableau he had found. He fell silent. The only sound was the faint scratch of Hiruzen's pen as he took a few notes on a corner of a report, his face unreadable. Finally, the Hokage sighed. It was a deep, weary exhalation that seemed to come from the very foundations of the village. He set his pipe down and closed his eyes, the lines on his face deepening into canyons of regret and burden. He wasn't going to rant at Kakashi. There was no point. Genin died on missions. It was the tragic arithmetic of the shinobi world, a cost factored into every deployment order he signed. Kakashi was a jonin of the highest caliber. He knew the risks, and he had done everything a commander could. A lecture on failure would be a hypocrisy of the highest order, a disrespect to the dead and the grieving. The failure, Hiruzen knew in his old bones, was systemic, historical. It lay in the choices that led to the Uchiha massacre, in the creation of a Jinchuriki who was hated, in a village that bred orphans and then sent them out to die for its walls. So, Hiruzen said, his voice gravelly with suppressed emotion. He opened his eyes, staring at the mission scroll as if it were a funeral notice. The last loyal son of the Uchiha is gone. He paused. The next name a ghost in the room, a specter that haunted both their pasts. Now, only Itachi remains. The mention of that name was a taboo, a key to a locked room filled with national shame and unspeakable horror. It hung between them, charged and terrible. Itachi Uchiha, prodigy, murderer, missing nin, and now, the sole surviving bearer of a massacred clan's name, and the target of a dead boy's vengeance, passed to a blind vessel of demonic power. The Hokage turned from the window, his aged eyes settling on Kakashi. He saw not just the elite Jonin, but the boy who had lost his father, his teammate, his sensei, and now his student. The cycle was cruel. Kakashi, Hiruzen asked, his tone shifting from leader to something akin to a weary grandfather. How are you feeling? Kakashi's visible eye remained fixed on a point just above the Hokage's shoulder. A myriad of answers flickered behind his mask, numb, hollow, like history is a record stuck on the same tragic groove. Like I failed another Uchiha who looked to me. What he said was, honestly, Hokage-sama, I just want to finish this debriefing now. It was not disrespect. It was survival. To stop, to dwell, was to invite the ghosts of Rin, of Obito, of Minato-sensei, and now of Sasuke, to congregate in his mind. He needed motion, a duty. Hiruzen nodded slowly, a profound understanding in his gaze. He did not press. He reached into a drawer of his desk and withdrew not a pen, but a small, intricate stamp set in a square of dark cherry wood. It was the official seal of the Hokage, its design granting absolute authority for procedures within the village. He held it for a moment, feeling its weight, the weight of decision, of altering a destiny. Go to the hospital, Hiruzen said, his voice firm now, the leader once more. Oversee the procedure, ensure the boy's will is respected. He extended the stamp. This grants full authorization to the head medic, for the transplant, and for any subsequent unique care Naruto-kun may require. The boy's will, not a medical necessity, but a last request. A bloodline succession enacted not by birth, but by death and choice. Hiruzen was sanctioning it. He was making it official Konoha business. Kakashi took the stamp. The wood was cool, the carved edges sharp against his palm. It was heavier than any weapon. He didn't bow, didn't offer platitudes. He simply closed his fingers around it, turned, and left the office as silently as he had entered, a solitary figure carrying the permission to sow the legacy of one lost boy into the flesh of another. Behind him, Hiruzen sank into his chair, the weight of the village, of its sins and its losses, settling upon his shoulders once more. Outside, the night deepened, unaware of the seismic shift that had just been authorized within the sterile walls of the hospital, where a piece of the Uchiha clan's tragedy was about to find a new, unimaginable home. The hospital corridor outside the surgical suite was a study in sterile, anxious silence. The air, thick with the scent of antiseptic and bleached linens, did little to cleanse the deeper stench of blood and loss that seemed to cling to Kakashi and Sakura. They occupied a small, harshly lit waiting area, a world of vinyl chairs and faded motivational posters about health that felt like a cruel joke. Kakashi leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, his single visible eye fixed on the blank, metallic doors of the operating theater. He had handed the Hokage's seal to the head medic, a stern-faced man with hands that spoke of decades of precise, life-altering work. No questions were asked. The stamp was law. The medic had only nodded, his eyes briefly flickering with a complex emotion, part professional curiosity, part profound unease, before assembling his most trusted team. The Uchiha eyes, preserved in a special chakra-infused solution, were brought from the cold storage of the morgue with a level of ceremony usually reserved for state secrets. Inside that sealed room, under lights brighter than the sun, a procedure of immense delicacy and dark symbolism was underway. What remained of Uzumaki Naruto's ruined eyes, the lenses shattered, the optic nerves severed by the precise, desperate strikes of the senbon, were carefully, respectfully removed. The surgeons worked with a reverence that bordered on dread. They were not just removing damaged tissue, they were excising the last vestige of Naruto's original sight, the blue eyes that had held such defiant, unwavering light. Then came the grafting, the onyx eyes of Uchiha Sasuke, still holding the profound, genetic potential of the Sharingan, dormant but alive within their unique chakra pathways, were lifted from their preservative bath. The connection of the optic nerves was a work of microscopic genius, a fusion of Uzumaki vitality and Uchiha legacy. Chakra threads finer than spider silk were used to stitch the alien organ into the familiar socket, to coax Naruto's formidable life force to accept, to nourish, to claim this final, bloody gift. The procedure was silent, save for the beep of monitors and the soft, clipped commands of the lead surgeon. It proceeded with a smooth, chilling efficiency. There were no complications, no rejections, as if the eyes themselves were waiting for this vessel, as if the will of the donor was guiding the surgeon's hands. Outside, time lost meaning. Sakura sat rigidly in one of the vinyl chairs, her back straight, her hands clenched in her lap. She had not gone home. She had not changed her blood-stained clothes. She had not slept. The image of Sasuke's cooling body on the bridge was a wound that bled inwardly, a psychic injury that threatened to paralyze her. The proud tilt of his head gone slack, the fierce intelligence in his dark eyes extinguished. It was a sight that had carved a canyon of grief through her spirit. She had loved him, admired him, built her world around him, and in a single moment, that world had turned to ash. But then she had looked at Naruto. She had seen the blank shock, the bandaged ruin of his face, the utter lostness of him as he held Sasuke's body. He was adrift in a darkness more complete than any she could imagine. Sasuke was gone, but Naruto was here, broken and bearing a burden she could scarcely comprehend. In that dichotomy, her crumbling spirit found a desperate, flinty resolve. Sasuke was beyond her help, but Naruto was not. His survival, his sanity, his ability to carry the weight Sasuke had placed upon him, that became her new mission. It was a purpose forged in the fires of loss, a way to honor Sasuke not with tears, but with action. To protect what her precious person had chosen to save. Kakashi watched her from his post by the wall. He saw the steel forming in her young spine, the grief being hammered into something harder. He recognized the signs. He had built his own persona on similar ruins. He said nothing. There were no platitudes that could bridge the chasm they were in. His own mind was a quiet storm. He thought of Obito, of Rin, of the endless cycle of gifted eyes and inherited hatreds. Was this progress, or merely a darker repetition? Naruto, with the Kyuubi and now the Sharingan, was a confluence of Konoha's greatest sins and greatest weapons. What would he become? Hours passed. The night shift cycled in. A nurse brought them untouched cups of bitter tea that grew cold on the small table between them. Finally, with a soft hydraulic hiss, the metallic doors to the surgical suite swung open. The lead medic emerged, peeling off his cap and mask. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear. He nodded to Kakashi. The procedure is complete. It was textbook, he said, the word feeling inadequate. The grafts are taking. His Uzumaki constitution is remarkable. The chakra pathways are already aligning. He's sedated and in recovery. The bandages must remain for at least 72 hours to allow for full neural and chakra integration. After that, the medic paused, choosing his words with care. After that, we will see if the donor's genetic traits manifest, and we will assess his sight. Kakashi gave a shallow bow of thanks. Understood. Sakura was on her feet, her knuckles white. Can we see him? The medic considered, then nodded. Briefly, he is unconscious. Do not disturb the bandages. They were led to a private recovery room. Naruto lay on the bed, looking smaller than ever amidst the tubes and monitors. A fresh, clean bandage was wrapped around his head, covering the new eyes beneath. His chest rose and fell steadily. He looked peaceful, a stark contrast to the bloodied, furious, broken boy of the bridge. Sakura approached the bedside slowly. She didn't reach out to touch him. She simply stood there, looking at the bandage, imagining the onyx eyes resting beneath, eyes that had once looked at her with disdain, then indifference, then faint acknowledgement. Now they were part of Naruto. It was terrifying and sacred. Kakashi stood in the doorway, a silent sentinel. The first step was over, the eyes were in place. But the true procedure, the grafting of Sasuke's vengeance, his ambition, his ghost onto Naruto's soul, was only just beginning. In this quiet, sterile room, as the village slept unaware, Uzumaki Naruto's new life truly commenced, sightless for now, but forever changed in the dark. The walk from the hospital to the Hiruno residence was a journey through a ghost town. The vibrant colors of the shops, the warm glow from house windows, the cheerful chatter of evening life, all of it passed by Sakura as if viewed through a thick, warped pane of glass. Her body moved on autopilot, one heavy foot in front of the other, guided by muscle memory alone. The weight in her chest was a physical thing, a lodestone of grief and guilt that made each step an effort. The cool night air did nothing to cleanse the smell of antiseptic and blood that seemed woven into her clothes and skin. Kakashi's order had been firm, broking no argument. You are no good to him, collapsing from exhaustion. Sakura. You need to rest. Your parents will be worried. Go home. His lone eye had held not the usual lazy indifference, but a commander's steel, and, beneath it, a flicker of shared, weary understanding. He would stand watch over the impossible boy in the sterile room. That was his burden. Hers, for now, was to survive the return to a normalcy that no longer existed. She finally stood before the familiar, modest house with its well-tended flower boxes. The light in the front window was a warm, yellow square against the deep blue of the night. It felt alien, a beacon from a life that belonged to someone else. That's all, folks.